Hello, you heathen heavy metal headbangers. My name is Alan, and it is once again time to review an album here on Heavy Metallurgy. This time out, I'll be discussing the new Primordial album. It is their 10th studio album entitled How It Ends, and it's being released on September 29th via Metal Blade Records. So, what does this new album sound like? Well, Primordial started out early on as a black metal band in their early years, but over subsequent albums, they pretty quickly changed directions and developed a pretty unique sound. That's always been part of the appeal of Primordial, is that they didn't really sound a lot like anybody else. They found their kind of own unique niche and stuck to it over a lot of albums. By about 2005, with the release of The Gathering Darkness, they had found their lane, and they've stuck pretty close to it over all their subsequent albums. So I think it was a pretty safe bet that How It Ends was not going to be a major change of form. And this band has found a formula they like and that they've been successful with. So the smart money said they were going to do something pretty similar to what they'd been doing over a whole bunch of albums that have come out in more recent years. The question is sticking to that formula a good thing, or has Primordial kind of worn out this particular niche? And now that they're just kind of maybe spinning their wheels? Well, let's dive into the new album and find out. The album starts out fairly well with the opening title track, although it takes a couple of minutes to get going. You're a good 2 minutes or more into this song before it feels like it's finally found its footing and is starting to move forward. But that said, it is a very strong track. After the first track, you have a couple of other decent numbers. Track number 2 is called Plows to Rust, Swords to Dust. And track 3, We Shall Not Serve, sees a little more forceful approach, a little more energy, a little more strong delivery in that track. So while I don't think any of these three are instant classics in the Primordial catalog, they are strong enough tracks, and the album's off to a decent start. Where things start to go a little bit sideways is after the short interlude, track number 4. When you get into track number 5 and the subsequent numbers, it feels like there's a slow subcoming where the songs simply aren't developing a whole lot, and they're kind of, sticking to a very, very kind of quiet lane a little too often. This is the point where you really start to miss the second guitarist. Michael O'Flowen left the band after the previous album was released. So he appeared on this one, Exile Amongst the Ruins, but he isn't present on the new album. And this means How It Ends is the first time the band is operating as a 4-piece in about 20 years. And Primordial's sound over those last 20 years has very much centered on these songs that have this kind of slow build and then slowly kind of back off. There's a very rhythmic pattern to a lot of the song's development. It follows an almost tidal-like cycle where the song waxes and wanes, very subtly throughout its length. But with 2 guitarists, you always had the chance to add little interesting things along the way to keep your interest held while you had this kind of slow development in the songs. And without O'Flowen on board for this album, you definitely notice that missing layer. In fact, on a lot of these songs, when you get into the middle and later parts of the album, it's more and more up to the drummer Simon to kind of step to the fore and keep these songs interesting. And he does a very good job. He's got a great performance throughout the album. But the problem is having to rely on the percussion song after song after song after song when these are relatively long songs, most of them, in that 6-7 minute kind of range. That really starts to kind of wear on me as a listener. And examples of this are tracks like, All Against All, followed by Death, Holy Death. Even the naming pattern here is following this kind of weird little rhythmic thing of word, repeat, word. It's like, let's mix it up a little bit more than that, both in the titles and in the music, please. In fact, parts of the song, Call to Cernunnos, actually the strings fade out completely, and you have portions where it's just vocal and drum. It sounds fairly cool, but there's not much else there to propel the song along.
The feet of the mountains deep, the land that your kin will load.
So, yeah, there's just a lack of presence musically in some of these songs, and that really does start to wear on you. I can't help but be a little bit amused by the title of track number 6, which is called Nothing New Under the Sun, because that really could describe Primordial's, take on their sound in 2023. They're not doing anything new here whatsoever. I've heard them do all this stuff before, and frankly, I've heard them do it in better and more interesting ways back on albums like, Redemption at the Puritan's Hand and To the Nameless Dead. So, yeah, I hate to say it, but the album does not do a good job of holding my attention. When you've got these longer songs and, there's only these very subtle changes along the way, it requires a really focused listen. But there's not a whole lot happening to hold your attention. This isn't like, a tech death album or something where you have to pay a lot of attention, but it's because there's 1,000 moving parts going on. This feels a little bit more like watching paint dry. There's a change occurring. You can notice it, but you have to pay a lot of attention, and the change is very subtle. There's an old saying, is the juice really worth the squeeze? Is what you're getting out of it worth the effort you're putting in? And as I move through the middle and late parts of this album, I'm not sure the time and attention it's taking to try to absorb these songs and notice the little things that are happening is really worth the payoff when you get there. Now, the album does end on a high note. When you get to the last track, Victory Has 1,000 Fathers, Death is an Orphan. That's a very long song title. I think I would have just cut it off and called Victory Has 1,000 Fathers myself, but hey, it's not my song. This song, right off the bat, the opening notes, you hear this suddenly ringing kind of clarion guitar solo that shakes you out of that stupor you've been in over the past few tracks. It's like, whoa, something more exciting is happening finally. And the song delivers after that. When the rest of the band kicks in, this song has more energy. There's more force to it. There's an urgency that's missing from a lot of the songs on this album. So it's great to see that the album closes out in a strong fashion. It took a while to get there, though. And it also kind of, shows that the band is capable of delivering that kind of higher impact song. And so one is left to wonder, why didn't you have something more akin to this song earlier in the track list? Why did you have so many of these, quieter, subtler songs back to back to back to back through the second half of the album? It would have been amazing to have something closer to Victory Has 1,000 Fathers in there around track 6 or 7 to, again, just kind of, mix things up a little bit, draw your attention back to what's happening, deliver a little bit of a spark to that second half of the album. Yeah, at the end of it, You've put in 65 minutes worth of listening, and you have a few decent tracks at the beginning, and you have a really strong closer, but I'm not sold on what the album delivers, through the bulk of the material. This, starts to kind of beg the question again, where is Primordial at this point in their career? They're on their 10th album, and over the past couple, it has already started to feel like the band has been treading water a little bit. Yeah, albums again like Exile Amongst the Ruins and Where Greater Men Have Fallen. These aren't bad albums whatsoever, but you definitely feel like the band is, to a degree, in a bit of a rut. Ruts work both ways. You've got a sound you're comfortable with. It's proving successful for you. People are enjoying it. That's great. Why wouldn't you kind of keep going back to that well? But if you go back to that same well too many times, you eventually aren't drawing anything new out of it. And I hate to say it, but I kind of feel that's like the point Primordial has gotten to with the new album. At this point, there's no reason for me to want to hear this particular album over the stronger and more interesting albums they've recorded earlier in their catalog. There's a lot of great material that Primordial has done. I don't feel like the new album is quite on the same level. If you're a really diehard fan and you enjoy the quote-unquote Primordial sound, you'll be perfectly happy with the album. You're not going to see any complaints with it, and you're going to disagree with me strongly in the comments about my take on this album. And again, I want to make it clear, I've been a fan of this band for almost 25 years. I'm not a newcomer. I'm very familiar with their catalog. I just feel like they've gotten to the point where they're not delivering anything that's particularly innovative. And after you deliver me the same album so many times, I do start to get a bit restless. It gets a little boring when it's just like, this sounds an awful lot like the other two albums you did. How far back in years do I have to go to hear something where you delivered it with a little more venom, a little more fire, a little more innovation along the way? The days of having a lot of, blackened screeches from, Avril, those are long gone. There's a few hints of, harsher vocals here and there in this album, but not very many. He seems to be saving that vocal delivery for other projects he's involved with, such as the Verminous Serpent album that he and others released earlier here in 2023. So yeah, in conclusion, I can't give this album a really strong recommendation except for, the very diehard Primordial fans. I could almost be in that camp considering how many other albums I own, but this is one I'm not going to rush out and pick up a copy of. I've played the promo a lot of times trying to absorb it, and I just don't want to keep spending an hour after hour after hour replaying this album to try to squeeze a little more enjoyment out of it. It's not quite getting there for me. Sad to say, but that's my take on the new Primordial album. Now, let's wrap things up with a call to arms. My call to arms this time out is something completely different from Primordial. It is the upcoming release from a Colombian speed metal band called Reckless. The album is called Sharp Magic Steel, and it's being released on Dying Victims Productions on October 20th, 2023. Sharp Magic Steel, it's a speed metal album, and speed metal albums are pretty straightforward. You're getting a very fast dose of classic heavy metal. There's been a lot of South American bands in recent years that have really been delivering the goods when it comes to giving an amazing representation of old school 80s thrash and speed metal, but doing it in a way that doesn't sound completely derivative. It definitely has the old school feel without just feeling like it's copycatting your favorite album from 1983 or 1986. And Reckless are doing that same thing. The speed metal flavor that Reckless is delivering on this album leans in the power metal direction, more so than the thrash zone. Best comparison that immediately struck me after listening to the album a little bit was very early Blind Guardian, such as the sound they had on their first 2 or 3 albums. In terms of the riffs and the way they're kind of building the songs, feels very, very similar to that flavor of speed metal. Now, if there's a hang-up on the Sharp Magic Steel album, it's that Reckless is probably missing one key element along the way. When you think of speed metal in the vein of early Blind Guardian, 2 things help make this kind of album stand out among its peers. First, you've got amazing guitar solo breaks that you got the pummeling riffs moving forward, you get through the verse and the chorus, and then the guitarists have to step up and crank it to 11. Reckless isn't quite doing that with the soloing yet. It's certainly not a bad performance, but they're not reaching through the speakers and really grabbing you and just shredding at full speed. And that's okay. They don't have to. But the other thing that kind of helps, really propel an album like Battalions of Fear to greatness in speed metal realms is they also have those big, hooky choruses that you can't help but get them stuck in your brain. It gives the songs a lot of replayability, makes you remember those songs long after the album's over. And the choruses on Sharp Magic Steel don't really deliver in that category either. So what you're left with is very solid speed metal. They know what they're doing, but they're missing that kind of X factor in the songs that will make them really stand out and become instant earworms that you want to play over and over and over again. So again, I think it's a good album, and I think the band shows a lot of promise. I just want to see them step up their game a bit on their next release and find that variable that they're going to include in their songs that make you want to just keep hitting the repeat play button over and over again. And if they can do that, then the next album's going to be a real tour de force in speed metal. Sharp Magic Steel is definitely worth a listen, especially for fans of the style. It just feels like it's a little bit plain. It needs one more ingredient to really put it over the top. But definitely a cool band and one worth keeping an eye on. All right, that is going to do it for this album review. Again, apology to the diehard Primordial fans out there. I wish I had a stronger take on the current album, but I feel like maybe the band has been treading water a little bit too long now. It's hard to say what they should do right. Do they go off in a completely different direction? That's probably not going to work for them, but they just need to find something. Maybe it's just a matter of bringing a new guitarist on board, getting back up to a 5-man lineup. That might allow them to work in, some more interesting material along the way so that as those songs are kind of, slowly building and slowly ebbing back and forth, you have that one extra guitar layer to add some dynamics and make the songs kind of stand out and really shine the way that we know Primordial is capable of doing. They've delivered so many strong albums over the years. We know they've got it in them. There's just something, that's currently maybe missing from the formula. But if you disagree, leave a comment down below. Let me know. If you're familiar with Reckless, drop a note too, and let folks know more about that very interesting up-and-coming band. Until next time, check out more heavy metal content here on Heavy Metallurgy. There's a live stream each Wednesday night where Marty, TJ, Jim, and Kellen pick an album for their album club discussion and pick it apart in great detail. It's a very fun live stream. And of course, there are the Friday live streams with Heavy Metallurgy where Marty and myself bring on different guests to discuss all kinds of different topics across the heavy metal universe. And of course, more album reviews are coming as well. There's a lot of releases from pretty big name bands that are coming out in September and October. So definitely keep your eyes peeled if you want more information and to get some insights about what those albums sound like. Until next time, keep it heavy and keep banging your head.